I'd like just to start out by grounding this conversation in an exciting moment that we find ourselves in, which is the $3 billion investment to support the development of community schools throughout California, including funds for technical assistance. And as you can see here, this builds on an initial $45 million investment to establish a California Community Schools Partnership Grant Program. Next slide, please. I also think it's helpful to ground the conversation in a definition of what community schools are, which you can see here, both a place and also a set of relationships between members of a school community, students, families, educators, and community partners, and the resources they bring. Next slide. Community schools are a research-backed strategy, which is what I'm going to focus on today. In 2017, the Learning Policy Institute and the National Education Policy Center released a community schools research review that looked at over 140 studies, and that's what you see here pictured. Next slide. Overall, this review found a wide range of benefits associated with community schools. This includes shorter-term benefits, such as increased attendance rates and improvements in students' attitudes towards school, as well as longer-term benefits, such as improved test scores, grades, especially in mathematics, and increased high school graduation rates. We also found some evidence that community schools can help to close achievement gaps for low-income students, English learners, and students in special education, as well as a cost-benefit savings of up to $15 for every dollar invested. This review also found 4 common features or pillars of community school, and these pillars form the basis of the California State Grant Program. It's important to note that while the pillars are evidence-based, they don't fully capture the on-the-ground wisdom of practitioners and community members who have been doing this work for many years. There is a newly approved California state framework, which was informed by community listening sessions that the California Partnership helped to organize, and some of you may have joined those sessions. And I think that framework starts to address some of those gaps, and I'll also try to fill in some gaps as I discuss each of the pillars. Next slide. The first pillar is integrated student supports, which is also sometimes known as wraparound services. This includes things like dental care, counseling, physical health care, housing access, and transportation and food assistance, often facilitated by a full-time community school coordinator. Of course, the foundation to effectively supporting students is to have a welcoming and inclusive environment with positive relationships. We know this from research on how young people develop. In addition, it's important to think of supporting family members, teachers, and staff, as well as student needs, especially during COVID. And finally, mapping assets and needs with a lot of input from students, families, and community members is really important for planning and implementing integrated student supports. And of course, that's what we're learning about today during this session. And mapping assets and needs is also called out as a key practice in the newly approved state framework. Next slide. The second pillar is expanded and enriched learning time and opportunities. This includes academic support, enrichment, and real-world learning, things like work-based learning, internships, and project-based learning that take place during the school day, after school, over the weekend, and during the summer. Rich and engaging learning experiences are hands-on, they're culturally sustaining, and they connect to students' interests and lived experiences. Community partners can play an important role by offering after-school programming, teaching extracurricular courses, providing push-in support in classrooms, and serving as partners for hands-on projects. And I know that the educators we're going to hear from today can share really compelling examples of what these learning experiences look like in their community schools. Next slide. The third pillar is active family and community engagement. This means inviting parents, caregivers, and other family members to the school, not just to volunteer or partake in services, but also to serve as true partners in supporting and educating students. And we heard Rosacella speak to this just a moment ago. This is so important, and there's a lot of room for growth when it comes to this. A dual capacity building approach is here, supporting both educators and families to engage with each other, for example, through home visits. It's also important to think about student voice as well, for example, through student-led conferences. Just examples, so there's other ways to think about these as well. And something I've really learned from the California Partnership is the importance of providing opportunities for engagement in languages spoken at home, like we're doing here today. Next slide. The last and arguably most transformational pillar is collaborative leadership and practices. This means establishing a culture of professional learning, collective trust, and shared responsibility for outcomes through strategies, such as having a site-based leadership team, employing a community school coordinator or manager or director, they're sometimes called, and supporting teacher learning communities. Collaborative leadership requires shared governance structures for meaningful decision-making that includes students, families, and staff. It's also helpful for all members of the school community to be on the same page about the challenges, the proposed solutions, and how progress will be measured. In other words, taking a shared approach to continuous improvement. I know we'll hear about that today as well. And during COVID, community schools were better situated than most schools to respond quickly and effectively to challenges, in no small part due to their collaborative leadership structures, their trusting relationships with students and families, and their existing partnerships with community-based organizations. So with that, I'm going to stop. We have a lot of amazing speakers to hear from today, so I will hand things back to Jessica.